This podcast was recorded on the ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation.
This is Humans on Rights, a podcast advocating for the education of human rights. Here's your host, Stuart Murray.
November 20th is International Children's Day, and the theme for International Children's Day is equity and inclusion for every child. Now, for those of you that may have read the notes or seen the photograph of my guest today, my guest is the CEO of the Manitoba Museum, and she is an educator, an activist, advocate, storyteller, and the most important part, I believe, that will tie into International Children's Day is she is a refugee. She has a great and varied background in terms of her professional career. She has a double major in business administration and in English. In 2014, she was selected as the emerging female leader in Canada. In 2019, she completed the executive education program at the Smith School of Business and Queen's University. Quite an incredible resume and background, which I'm going to put into the episode notes because there's too much to mention. But I am thrilled and very, very honored to have the CEO of the Manitoba Museum. Welcome to Humans on Rights, Dorota Blumczynska.
Thank you so much, Stuart. It's such an honor to be here with you today.
So, Dorota, I did mention at the top about International Children's Day. Just to put in perspective, I was born in Canada. My children were born in Canada. My grandchildren were born in Canada. You, however, are a refugee child, and I want to have a conversation with you about that journey. Tell us about where you were born and how it is that you found yourself coming to Canada.
I think it's just very important for me to begin by saying that I am a newcomer to Treaty Number 1 land, and I understand that I have a particular responsibility to not just to learn and understand the harms of the past, but also the injustices of the present. And that I think I'm compelled to enter into relationships that are built on a spirit of truth and reconciliation because in my life, I have benefited so tremendously from our shared lands and shared skies. So just to begin, I was born in the summer of 1981 in Poland. And if you're familiar with a little bit of Eastern European history, in December of 1981, martial law was introduced in Poland. So Poland had been Soviet occupied for decades. But in the 80s, it became very politically uneasy. There was a bit of a revolution brewing. So there was a great movement called Solidarność, which means solidarity. And a lot of ordinary people were part of that movement because they desired to bring democracy to Poland, to have Poland be free. Poland was economically oppressed. It was politically oppressed. There were limited opportunities, empty shelves, food stamps, rationing. It was a very complicated space and time. That represents my earliest years as a child. And my parents were active in Solidarność. So they were active in these kind of quiet underground gatherings, in mobilizing civil society, in disseminating information about how to uproot this imposed government. And I'm not exactly sure what happened, but there had to have been one or several events that led them to believe that remaining in Poland was perhaps no longer safe, or that the change that they were seeking may not come. And so at one point, they made, I think, a very difficult decision to leave Poland. And at that point in time, the Polish borders were closed. And it wasn't easy to leave the country. And so a bit of a ruse had to be created so that we could get authorizations to exit under the guise of a vacation. And so that's what my mother ended up doing with the four of us. Our father, I think, had managed to leave much earlier. And so he was already in Western Europe. But we, the four of us and our mom, boarded a train in Poznań, took a very, very long train journey through Czechoslovakia and then into Germany. And in Germany, we came to a refugee reception center where we were registered. And from there, we were transported to a refugee camp.
So, Dorota, just on that for a second, give us a sense of how old are you at this point?
Shortly after turning 7, I had taken the train. And before we came to Canada, I was just past 8.
So you're 7 years old, you're on a train. Did you know where you were going? Did your mother tell you where you were going?
No, my mom told us we were going on vacation, that we were leaving the country to go on holiday. You have to understand a number of things had to happen simultaneously. So one, she had to get 4 children out of the country, without causing alarm in any of us. And also having all of us rather cooperatively leave our lives behind, right? So leave behind, your books and your toys and your clothes and the life in the world that you know. You do that very differently if you think you're coming back in a few weeks. You leave everything behind very cheerfully because it's going to wait for you. And the other piece is that at various international checkpoints as the train was moving along, we were separated from our mom by armed guards, and we were interrogated as to where we were going and for how long. And children who don't know the truth can't tell the truth. Right. So if all you know is we're going on holiday,
vacation.
So that's what we said. We're going on vacation. I have a T-shirt and I have a sweater because who knows what the weather will be like. And that's it.
That's an intelligent mother.
Yes. She's very clever. Yeah.
So I apologize, but I just wanted to get a sense of age. So now you're on the train and you're moving to a refugee camp?
Yeah, so we arrived at a refugee camp. It was in Bavaria. It was outside of a town called Schönberg. And it was a number of, I think, 3 or 4 story buildings that were occupied by many families from, the Eastern European front. So we had come from many different countries. There were lots of languages spoken. We were generally kept in that area. We could enter we would go to town for school, but, once a week, trucks would arrive with our food rations. And so, boxes would come and there would be a box assigned per person. What I do remember is that the children's boxes, they were small, but a child's box, for example, would contain 500 grams of rice and a bag of Haribo gummy bears. And that's how you knew it was a child's box, is because it had some sort of candy in it. We lived rather peacefully. It was absolutely very difficult. It was, I think it was difficult on the communities that surrounded us. There were absolutely people who were very welcoming and kind. And then there were those people who felt that we were imposing and didn't want these migrants, within their town.
Mm-hmm. So, Dorota, was your father with you at this point?
Yes. So we were rejoined by him in Germany. And then my youngest brother was born in Germany. So our family grew to 7 in the 14 months that we lived there. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So what was your reaction, if you recall, as a young child, you're 8 years of age, thinking that you're going on vacation, and then you realize that, no, your life is going to pivot substantially?
It was very difficult. We all took it very differently. My eldest sister is 5 years older than me. So, she was already a young teenager. She was older, had more established friends and, knew our language. And then all of a sudden we were in this country and we were learning this new language. I mean, it was difficult to make sense of the fact that we had left everything the way it was, so we hadn't packed our home. There were things that I was aware of that I thought, well, but I left, this doll, or I left these toys, or, if I had known, I would have wanted to take this or that. But you can't take those things with you. You have to leave it all behind. But, we made great friends. We built a community there. My mother made friends with many German women. We had beautiful clothes donated to us. For the first time in our lives, we had different kinds of food brought to us. So we had Poland, being locked down, didn't have things like citrus fruit, so all of a sudden we had oranges. I remember oranges as very distinctly. I remember trying an orange. So, my life had in some ways improved. I was very lucky because we were in the camp together with my mother's sister and her family. So I had my cousins with us. And so there was a sense of familiarity and normalcy.
Was language a barrier for you in this camp?
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, we didn't speak any German, right? So we were taken into a German school and talked German, right away. And it was it was immediate immersion. So it wasn't by a Polish teacher teaching you German. It was just German and you had to learn it. I was 7 years old the first time I encountered the question of where are you from? And I was asked that by a very nice German farmer whose fields I had snuck into because he had a horse in his field. And so I had climbed a hill to leave the buildings in the camp. And I had walked over to this horse and I was standing on the fence and the farmer came over and started speaking in German to me. And he knew I was from the camp down the hill, and the question came of, where are you from? It was the first time I began to realize that I was outside of something. I hadn't made the connection that I was no longer from wherever it is that I was, right? And I had to now begin to answer that question. But, I answered it and he was very kind and he threw a blanket on top of the horse and, plucked me on top of it and walked me around in circles. So it was a great act of compassion. And actually in my 20s, I traveled back to that farm to look for that man to thank him for that act of kindness.
And was he alive when you got there? Were you able to do that?
No, the farm had been sold to another family. It was still there. And so the pasture was there. Everything that I had remembered was there. And I was with friends who spoke German. So they explained all of the context. But it was still wonderful to go back to that space and see it a bit with a different set of eyes as an adult.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So amazing experience, Dorota. So how do you find yourself? Is there another step between getting to Canada and tell us what your experience was, what you learned and what you thought and what it was like to know you were coming and when you arrived, what your first sort of sense was?
Coming to Canada, we were woken up in the night and put into a very small vehicle and driven through the forests of Germany to a major city to be put on an airplane. For me, life was an adventure. I had never been on an airplane, so and again, I didn't have a sense of the permanence. I couldn't comprehend at that age what an ocean was and what it meant to cross that ocean. And this is the 1980s. There's no internet. No one's showing you pictures of where you're going. You're completely traveling into the unknown. Of all the things that we could have taken, again, we left behind the few things that we had managed to acquire in Germany. My mother brought bed sheets because she thought, well, who knows if they're going to have bed sheets in Canada, and the journey was long, and then we land in another place and it's late October. It was October 27th. It's cooler than we're used to. People are speaking yet another language.
And where did you land, Dorota?
In Winnipeg.
In Winnipeg. So you flew from Germany
to Toronto and then Toronto to Winnipeg.
Wow. In October.
In October. Yeah. And then we get here and we were sponsored here by a Polish church group as privately sponsored refugees. So we had some people at the airport to receive us, and we were taken to a home on Selkirk Avenue, quite close to Selkirk and Main Street. You start again and you wake up the next day and you go to school and you start trying to figure it out again. And it was very overwhelming. It was overwhelming and frightening.
Yeah. And what age are you now, Dorota, just to put it into perspective, now that you're in Winnipeg?
At this point, I'm 8.
Wow. Yeah. So what an incredible amount to experience in the first 8 years of your life.
Yeah.
So you're now 8 years of age and you're in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And is your whole family again with you, Dorota? Has everybody made this journey?
Yes. So all 7 of us came across. Yeah.
Right. So through your eyes, you arrive in Winnipeg. I guess part of this in your own mind, you wonder, is this the final stopping point, or is there another point after this? I mean, rationalizing that.
By this point, I had almost near fluency in German, and that was of no use all of a sudden. So that was difficult. And I think as in the few days that followed our landing came Halloween, which was not something that we had ever experienced before. So, my real introduction to Canada was quite warm, because I think we ended up having a bed sheet thrown over us, holes cut into the eyes, pillowcases in hand. And I'm pretty sure my first words were trick or treat.
Right, exactly.
So it was a great country as far as I was concerned, right? Because I got to come home with massive amounts of candy, and I was like, what is this place? It was difficult in that in the months that followed, winter arrived. We had never known that kind of winter. So in Poland, +1, +2, when it gets really cold, it's -2, -3, and everything shuts down, and people can't function. And then all of a sudden here it's -20 and -25 and -30, and my parents struggle to find work, and then eventually enter into survival employment. But all the working isn't enough. It's just not enough to feed 7 people, to house 7 people, to have, enough clothing. So, then we're getting food from Pampers, and we're getting clothing delivered to us in garbage bags, that other people don't want. We're struggling. We end up using my eldest sister's social insurance number in order to gain additional employment. Within no time, I think I'm about 10 or 11 years old, and I'm cleaning offices at night, together with my older sister and my dad.
Are you going to school at that time also,
Yeah.
Dorota? So you're going to school during the day, you're working at night. And, if you, at that time, I know if I ask you a question to look back, I mean, when you look back, obviously there's tremendous emotional triggers that may come to you. But when you're there at that time, did you ever get a sense, as you're going to school and working at night and watching your parents, did you ever get a sense of whether there's a sense of desperation, or did you sort of say, look, we're free, we're in this country, it may be cold, but, did you ever want at that point to say, where is this all going?
I don't know that children have that kind of awareness. I can tell you that I was incredibly happy, that I was always a very, very happy child. I loved the cleaning job. I did a really good job of it. And I've not kept it a secret. One of the places that I cleaned was the offices of the Children's Museum.
Oh, wow.
And part of my job that was assigned to me was that I had to slide down that tree slide with a rag behind me so I could wash the slide, and sit in the long train and wash all the tables and the benches of the train. So quite frankly, I had, free, unencumbered access to the Children's Museum for hours and hours. So no, I never had a sense that things were as difficult as they were. I think the only time that I kind of had a bit of a glimpse into things not being okay is when I would go grocery shopping with my mom. And when we would get to the cash, and she would run out of money. And so then she would have to select things and start putting them back and saying, no, I'm not buying this, and not this, and not this. And when I saw her kind of count out, how many buns and how many meals this was supposed to last for. And I think my sense that we were really struggling was clear in those moments where she tried to somehow, have enough food for all of us and clothing for all of us. And yeah.
Yeah. And did you have a sense that you were starting to become part of a community, Dorota, at that point?
Not entirely. My parents were very much part of the Polish diaspora. Really, their friends were Polish. We went to Polish, church on Sunday. We went to Polish school on Saturday. My mother was a teacher at the Polish school. Because it was my parents' identity was so galvanized, they knew who they were. They were Polish. They were Polish in Canada, but they were still Polish. And so I feel like they were never negotiating their core identity. They knew who they were. And so, they kept to the Polish community, which kept us to the Polish community. And it also, in some ways, prevented us from building meaningful relationships or building friendships, right? But also, as I think as migrant children, we didn't have the freedom to be children. Like I had to look after my brothers. I had to rush home at 3:30 so my mother could take the bus to go to work at 4, and then I would be left with my 2 little brothers, and I would need to cook the dinner, or I need to do all the laundry, or I didn't hang out at malls. I didn't go to the movies. I didn't have those things.
Yeah. So, Dorota, you're a young child, and again, we're talking about World Children's Day and the perspective of what we all might have today as we look back. On your time at that young age, did you ever get a sense that when I grow up, I want to be?
Oh, yeah.
What did you want to be?
I wanted to be a writer. From the earliest time that I can remember, I wanted to be a writer. I wrote poetry, I wrote plays, I wrote short stories, dialogues, monologues. I loved literature, I loved storytelling, and I loved the power of being able to create dreams and almost make them come true through writing. It was a huge passion and a dream to become a writer.
And so you obviously graduated, because I know you went to university, but you graduated from high school.
Yeah.
And which high school did you graduate from, Dorota?
Kelvin.
Okay. And when you graduated, did you want to go to university? Did you have the opportunity? Was that something that was even discussed in your family?
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, both of my parents had master's degrees. So, we were very much raised with, you're going to go to university, you're going to go to university. But it's important to share that I think around the time that I was about 12 or 13 years old, my mother had cancer for the first time. And she battled the cancer. I think for a little while it appeared to, be gone. Then her cancer came back. And when she was 44 years old and I was 16, she died. She died in September. And 2 months later, I was in the child welfare system. So I became a ward of CFS. And so I lived under the care of the province until I aged out at 18. But prior to my mom passing away, I had made a promise to go to university. So when I graduated high school, I had 2 things I needed. Well, really 3 things I needed to face. One is I didn't have the credit to go to university. So I needed to go back to high school and do more credits to go to university. I needed to figure out how it is that I would afford to go to university because I was entirely on my own. But also at 18, I aged out of CFS, which means that overnight, you lose your supports. Everyone says you're an adult. And now you're supposed to take care of yourself. Well, I can tell you an 18-year-old is not an adult, but I had to figure out how to live, how to provide, how to take care of myself, finish the schooling, get to university. Yeah. So I did. Yeah. I went to university, but I would say that, my first degree took me 7 years, and it's because I worked full time and I went to night school, or I flipped to night work and then went to daytime university full time, but it took a long time.
So, Dorota, when you became a ward of the Child and Family Service system, what was happening at that time with your brothers and sisters, your family?
My mom passing away was very difficult on us. I was 16. My sisters were 19 and 21, so they were adults. My brothers were 8 and 10, so they were still very little. A month after my mom passed away, my paternal grandmother passed away in Poland. And so, my father's world was shattered when my mom passed, and then it was further broken when his mother passed. And, when he got back from Poland, from the funeral, I think it was too much to look after everyone. And so my school was called by CFS for me to come to the social worker's office on Broadway. And so I did that. And I was in the social worker's office when a phone call was made to my father to confirm that I was not able to come home anymore. At that point, he confirmed that, and he relinquished his parental rights to me, stating that he didn't have the means to support the 3 remaining children who were under 18. And yeah,
So did you go and live with another family, or were you literally on your own?
No, I was initially told by the social worker that I would be going to a group home. And I think given everything that was happening at that point in time, having just, lost my mom and everything I had known was falling apart, I begged them for the chance to live independently. And at 16, CFS can decide that a 16-year-old can live independently. And so they hesitantly agreed and said, yeah, you can, we'll try it out. You have to find a very cheap apartment. We'll just pay the rent, and then you'll get a monthly allowance and you need to support yourself, food, bus tickets, clothing, utilities, everything.
You're still going to school, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm still going to high school. Yeah. And so I did that. I found an apartment. It was not great. It was not in a safe place. It was really awful. And the next 2 years that followed were unbelievably hard, but I survived them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think, Dorota, one of the things that comes across when we go to your background and your history and what you've done, the challenges that you've been through personally and with your family are really quite extraordinary. And I think, the notion that you're able to talk about the fact that as a young person, an 8 or 9-year-old, you were working, cleaning the toilets and cleaning the museum, that you are now the president and CEO of that institution.
Oh, no. It was the Children's Museum.
Oh, the Children's Museum. I apologize. So the Children's Museum. Yeah, not the Manitoba Museum.
Not the Manitoba Museum.
Yeah. When you graduated, did you get a sense? I mean, you wanted to be a writer. You write beautifully. Your website is full of a number of blogs, which I've read, and I want to come back and talk about. Some of them are very, very powerful. When you graduated, Dorota, from Kelvin, did you see a path for yourself? Did you sort of say, this is where I'm going? Or was it a matter of just saying, look, let me just get to university and see where that might go?
There was no path. There was no path. I graduated, shortly after I got pregnant with my first child. I lost her in the second trimester, which was very difficult. I went abroad to Thailand, actually, on a special exchange, because I had been enrolled in university when I lost her. But having been enrolled as a post-secondary student, it qualified me for an international exchange. So even though I had to withdraw because of her loss, I still managed to go on the exchange. I went to Thailand for, I don't know if it was 4 or 5 months. And my time abroad was life-changing. I came back, I think, on a Friday. I was in university class on the Monday. I went straight into school. I borrowed money from my grandmother at that point to go to school. And you have to understand, it's a woman who had gone through so many wars, and she said, I'll help you go to school, but I'm not paying for your school. So we wrote a promissory note, and I borrowed money from my grandmother, which took me years to pay back. But then I also found a job at the RBC call center, their customer contact center. And I did well, so I kept going on with doing this business degree that my mother wanted me to do because it was practical, because being a writer wasn't practical and I was never going to make any money on writing. So I needed to do something practical. So I was doing a business degree for her, and I was working at RBC, learning and taking their courses. I was at RBC for almost 5 years. And in those 5 years, I went from the customer contact center to a branch, to being a personal financial services representative, to obtaining a license to sell mutual funds so I could do retirement planning and mortgages and investment advice. So by the time I'm, 24, I've really gained a lot of experience, but also climbed to a variety of roles within RBC. I have a business degree, and it's all there. Everything my mother wanted is all there.
Dorota, let me just backtrack for 1 second. So you were pregnant, you lost a child. You went to Thailand?
Yes.
And you said that it was life-changing. How so?
For a part of the time, I was with a wonderful family in a homestay situation, in a very small village. Ratchaburi, which is west. I think it's west of Bangkok. I found community there. I was in a home with parents. So I think for me, there was a lot of healing around that to be taken care of after being, on my own for 3 years. They were very spiritual people. So my host father had arranged for me to go into a Buddhist monastery. And the way that works is that, there are Buddhist nuns who spend their lives in monasteries, but also, lay people can enter a Buddhist monastery for a period of time, for a period of, silent reflection. And so he had arranged that for me. And so for a period of 7 days, I was in this monastery in the middle of the Thai jungle where no one spoke English. So I was learning a little bit of Thai, sleeping on the floor. You eat 1 meal a day, and this is before sunrise. And then you take your metal containers and you walk through the villages gathering food that you're going to eat the next day. You do meditation, you take part in prayer and in reflection. You wear these beautiful white robes, one for sleeping and one for the day, and nothing else. So it's very basic and minimalistic, but it's also very much intended to not have you be distracted by everything on the outside of yourself so that you could look deeply inward. And one of the most beautiful spots within that the monastery grounds was around library. And that library was filled with books written in English about various religions of the world and various value systems and philosophies. And so I would spend hours and hours just sitting there and reading that. The one person who spoke a little bit of English was the head mother. And so, I had a chance to speak to her about the loss of my daughter and my grief. And she gave a lot of guidance around how to celebrate that life, but also not how to sever the connection, but how to separate yourself from the grief of it. So holding on to the memory and to the joy of that life, but not holding on to the pain, because that pain was like a weight that was holding you down. And the head mother spoke a lot about moving with intention into the future. So that was one experience within months of an experience that just showed me a different world and a different way of being.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dorota. So I asked you to go back. Let's kind of pick up where you were at, which is you're now at RBC for 5 years. Things are looking, very positive for you. You've established yourself. Continue on with sort of your next chapter of your life.
Well, as I had said, it was everything my mother wanted, but it wasn't what I wanted. And the thing is, I wasn't happy. And there came an opportunity to get a scholarship to study abroad. And so I applied for it and I got a scholarship to go and study in France, in Bordeaux. And I thought, okay, I'm doing it. And I finished the business degree. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go to France. I'm going to do additional coursework in language and try and, increase my French language skills. And then the day I leave for France, I find out I'm pregnant. So I'm like, okay, no problem. So I go to France, with my tiny baby inside me. I study. I'm there, for about 4-5 months. And then there's some complications with the pregnancy, and the advice is to go back home. So I returned to Canada. Months later, I have my son, who's now 16 and a half.
Right. What's his name, Dorota?
Isaiah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And, Isaiah's born. And then that fall, I register for more university classes, but this time it's all English, creative writing, writing children's stories. It's all writing, and it's all for me. And it's what I want at this point, and I start doing all of that. I'm raising him. I'm, taking university classes. Certainly things are not as abundant as they were when I was working full time at the bank, but, life is moving forward. And then I got a request to start volunteering in a program with refugee women helping them learn English in the basement of an inner city school through this little organization called IRCOM, where my best friend had just become the executive director and said, I need everybody to be there to help. So I said, okay, well, I've got this little kid, at this point, Isaiah's about 1.5 years old. And she said, it's no big deal, just bring him along. And so I go, into that classroom with this child on my hip and sit down at the table, lots of other moms, lots of other babies, and we start practicing English. And I fall in love with IRCOM. And I fall in love with the work of being with community and teaching English and building a sense of belonging and sharing our stories and understanding our histories. And that's kind of the beginning of things moving.
So Dorota, tell us a little bit about IRCOM. I mean, what does it stand for? I know, but I'd like you to explain it.
IRCOM is the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization of Manitoba. And it's a settlement organization for newly arrived refugee families. So people land and they can find temporary housing for their first 3 years in Canada at IRCOM. And together with that housing is a lot of programming, to learn language or gain employment or understand the healthcare system, just a whole myriad of supports and services that are intended to help people meaningfully integrate. And at that point in time, IRCOM was much smaller than it is today. But the first position that became available was a teacher of English as a second language. And I had been volunteering in the classroom. And somewhere along the way, I did a certificate in teaching English as TESOL. So I had a TESOL certificate from the University of Manitoba that I completed. And I had a bachelor degree. And so that qualified me to teach English to adults. And so my first job at IRCOM was 10 hours a week, but really it was full time, but it was 10 paid hours a week. But I got to bring my son with me into the childcare space. Yeah, it was great.
I'm glad you sort of talked a little about IRCOM, Dorota, because I was blessed to be introduced to, I think, when you left, I believe Shireen took over after you left, and Shireen Denito, and she's been on my podcast, and a great story. But I know that was your history and sort of your back channel and your, sort of how you got yourself so established in this community. And I mean, you came from a lived experienced opportunity, right? So when you were talking to people, it must have been very important for them to hear your story, but for you to share that lived experience.
I think it was, but I think being at IRCOM the gift was really given to me through that experience. I mean, I'm the one who benefited tremendously because I have to tell you, I didn't know a lot of my own story until a number of years ago. In my family and in my community, we talked a lot about being immigrants, but we didn't talk a lot about being refugees, except there were pieces about the story that never made sense, right? So these are your sponsors. Well, generally, immigrants don't have sponsors, and so on and so forth. So I actually only learned the truth of how we arrived through a Freedom of Information request that I had an immigration lawyer help me with, that we submitted to the federal government to obtain my family's immigration file. And it was in that immigration file that it was confirmed that we were privately sponsored refugees. And then I wrote to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees with the codes on my immigration documents. And I said, what are these codes? And they confirmed that they were refugee codes. They were not immigrant class codes. And so I did a lot of work, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago at most, to really understand the story, because everything I had been told wasn't consistent. And yet what I was hearing from many refugee families at IRCOM was so much more of what I had experienced. The international crossing, the being in a camp, the being sponsored, and I was like, this is, yeah.
Right.
They helped me make sense of my own life.
So Dorota, when you find all of that information out, I mean, when I think about how you have found yourself to this conversation that we're having today and where you've come from and sort of the number of times that you have been on a journey, not knowing where you were going, starting from the very first time you left Poland, to all of these places that you are trying to discover your personal human life journey. When you discovered, or it became very clear that you were a child refugee, how did that impact you? What sorts of things did you have to sort of work through? And I go back to the powerful piece that you learned in Thailand in terms of how to deal with the loss of a child. How did you deal with the fact that this was something that was now who you really are, and you're now an adult and you're sort of having to deal with this? You're a mother. How did that all sort of come to sort of be who you are?
It's been a very complicated and difficult journey. Like I said, I did the freedom of information request, and that was one piece of information, and then at one point, and I don't even remember, but it's in one of the blogs where my auntie had called from Poland and said, there's this storage locker and it's filled with boxes of things your family left behind. And I couldn't make sense of it, but I went home to Poland with my 3 kids at this point. I left them at my cousin's, and I went with my aunt to rummage through these, boxes that hadn't been opened for 30 years, and opening these boxes and seeing parts of a life that I think I thought I had imagined, or I couldn't tell if it was memory or if it was stories that were told to me that I was then painting into memories. But there were things, in those boxes, bowls, apple-shaped bowls, that I had used as a very young child that I remembered loving. And all of a sudden they were there. And, that was another piece that came together. So I think, in the last, I don't know, decade, but perhaps most of my adult life, they're puzzle pieces that have been coming together, bits of information that have helped me try to better understand, who I am and who I've been, and maybe have a little bit of courage as to where it is that I'm headed. I've been afraid to dream. When you come through these circumstances, I think especially as a migrant child, in part you're collateral damage in this process of trying to build a new life, because like I said, my parents knew who they were. They lost a lot, but they also had access to information, and they had power and decision-making ability and all of it. The children had none of that. And we were navigating these 2 different worlds and realities, conflicting information, expectations of us within our home and then within school and society that, weren't consistent, trying to create an identity that made sense, and then carrying the burden of everything they had lost, right? Because, God bless migrant parents, but they'll never let you forget everything that they lost and gave up,
right,
to bring you to safety. Like I've heard that from every single child, that was brought over, is my parents will never let me forget. You have all of this, you're saddled, you're weighed down by so much complicated history and so much trauma. And like I said, I've almost my entire life, I've been afraid to dream. I've been afraid to want for something greater or imagine myself capable of something bigger, because I've always felt pulled down and held back, because who was I to want something more, especially when my parents had lost everything, for me to at least have access to the basics. And here I am wanting to not stop at the basics, but maybe build the lives that they, forfeited.
So, Dorota, you have 3 children. You talked about the child that you lost before you went to Thailand. You've also lost another child.
Yes, I lost a baby 2 years ago.
And you wrote about that. Is the reason I bring it up is that you wrote about it. It was a very powerful blog that you wrote. And for those people that are listening to this podcast, I'm going to make sure that in the show notes, all of your information, where you need to find out information about you, Dorota, that people can go, because it's very, very powerful. But I think about what you just shared with you as how you came to be from a child into a grown adult to a parent, a mother. Have you shared all of this with your children? And if you have, how have you positioned it in such a way that you want to empower them to dream?
I think my children, to the extent that it's appropriate based on their ages, know a lot of my own story. They certainly know that I wasn't born here. They know that I came here as a child. They know that, my mom died when I was young and that my life got very hard. My children do very clearly know that, the three of them are the children that I've had the joy of raising, but that there are two other children that I never got to meet. And I've never hidden that from them because I think it's so important to acknowledge and make space for all the pain. We're so accustomed to celebrating and to highlighting and to saying that things have been wonderful and successful, and those things are great too. But I've made sure along the way that my children have understood what a hard journey it has been in some ways, to the extent that it's okay to tell them at their age. I love being a mother. I love the fact that I have a chance to relate to them, feeling perhaps a bit more certain than my parents did, at this age when they were going across the world and losing a lot. I will admit that I am a very traumatized person, and I think having grown up in poverty and having experienced, hunger as a child, but also hunger, in the CFS system, I know that my trauma response in some cases, inflicts stress on them because I know that I'm always afraid of being hungry or going without. That's a very hard thing to get rid of, even when you're not really facing it anymore. It hangs over you, right? And I think part of what has driven me tremendously is that I don't ever want to risk their sense of safety and their security. I never want them to be alone. I never want them to go without. I want to shelter them from as much of what I experienced as possible.
And Dorota, have you or will you take your children, assuming that they would like to, but would you take them back and share where you came from so that they can sort of understand your journey?
Oh, I have. My children have been to Poland many, many times. My children are all Polish citizens. I've worked to secure for them citizenship in my country because it's very important to me. We've gone back to where I lived as a small child. They were very close with my late grandmother, my mother's mother, who, loved and cared for me for many years after my mom was gone. They know most of my relatives back home. They've had glimpses into, that other life. And I think as they get older, I look forward to sharing more with them because I think I see in them such compassion and empathy. And I think they understand it. They understand it on a deep level that there is a part of me that's also a child. With my mom dying at 16, there is a part of me that will forever be 16 years old, right? It never got to grow up. That part that needs a parent and that part that seeks, that safety and sense of security that only a parent can give. So it creates a bridge for us to relate to one another as they get older and I stay forever 16.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Having a bit of child or a lot of child in all of us, regardless of the age, there's nothing wrong with that. Dorota, would you share some of the lessons that you learned from your mother that you are imparting now as a mother to your children?
I don't know if it's helpful, but food is love. So we cook a lot in our home. We make a lot of very traditional Polish food. My daughter's father is from southern India, so we also make a lot of Indian food, whereas my son's father is Mennonite Canadian, so we also have some Mennonite and Germanic foods. So we have very, very delicious and diverse meals at home, so that's an important piece. My mother was very patriotic. She was very proud of being Polish. I'm very proud of being Polish. I have held on to my name despite a lot of pressure to go and anglicize it. So I hope to, instill in my children a sense of pride as Polish, Mennonite Canadians, Polish Indian Canadians. We're very family oriented. My mother was the glue within our family. And that was through celebrations and it was through holidays, but I think it was also in everyday life through laughter and silliness and playing and having fun. And I think my children and I do a lot of that in very, very silly ways. my mother was a dreamer. I think despite her own challenges, she was a dreamer. And I think I'm trying to figure out how to reawaken the dreamer inside of me that I put to sleep for a very long time. And I think that's where my blogging comes in, right? That desire to dream and make dreams come true. But I'm hoping that my children can follow their dreams. Like where possible, I'm trying to put their dreams at the forefront of reality, because reality sinks in anyways, but it's the dreams we have to protect.
Mm-hmm. So 3 quick points I want to sort of get your thoughts on, Dorota. Number one is you are obviously sought after as a keynote speaker, which is, you're a storyteller. And so, it's fantastic. But I note that we just had a new lieutenant governor sworn into Manitoba, Lieutenant Governor Anita Neville, and you were the keynote speaker at her installation. What's your message? What did you talk about?
Just to correct, it wasn't at her installation. It was at a breakfast with Leadership Winnipeg, but it was a few days after the installation. So it was the first public event that the Lieutenant Governor held. So it was a tremendous honor. The piece that I talked about, Leadership Winnipeg is organized by the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce, and it's a fantastic group of aspiring leaders or mid-career leaders or just folks who have a voice within them that says to them, that they're ready and perhaps excited about a more ambitious or a different future. And so I know what it's like to have that kind of voice within you. So part of what I talked about was my leadership journey. I can't separate my leadership journey from my life's journey, because I think the way I lead is a result of the way I've lived. Wherever possible, I think I've lived with optimism, and so I lead with optimism. I've lived with my heart on my sleeve, and so I lead with my heart on my sleeve. So I talked about leadership, and I talked about why it is that I came to the Manitoba Museum. I talked about answering that calling within ourselves and not ignoring that internal voice that says, reach further, go higher, do more. I mean, the keynote was a big piece of it, but I think it was the dialogue that followed and the engagement that was very enriching, because it just gave me a chance to go deeper into, what it is about leadership that I love, the challenges along the way. And I do think that leadership is an extraordinary honor. To lead means to be trusted, and to be trusted by those you lead, and to be entrusted by entire organizations to care for them. So that's a bit of the things that we talked about.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And I just, 2 quick other things that I wanted to get your thoughts on, Dorota. You are the CEO and president and CEO of the Manitoba Museum. What is one thing that you think that Manitobans should know about the Manitoba Museum and don't?
It's not fair to ask me for one thing, because there are so many things. What I would say, and they're not my words, they're the words of Dr. Roland Sawatsky, who's the curator of history here at the museum. And Dr. Sawatsky said, your story matters here. And what I would say that I would want every single Manitoban to know is that all of our stories matter here. All of our stories are Manitoba stories. One of the most insightful things that my 7-year-old said to me this summer is, we were on holiday back home, and out of nowhere she said, Mama, we are where we come from. And I thought, how incredibly intuitive of her to understand that we can come from somewhere, wherever it is that we come from, and be that. And we happened to not be in Poland at the time when she said it. But, her observation that, we represent the place that we are coming from today. That's what I would say is the most critical message to Manitobans about the museum's work is the museum's work, all the stories, all of the histories, they're all ours because it is where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to know where we've come from and where we were born and our heritage and our past and our beautiful and complicated and, wonderful and painful histories. But all of that has a place here and all of it is important. And I think the most extraordinary Manitobans are often the most ordinary Manitobans. who just live wonderful lives and have the courage to share those stories with others so we can be inspired by them. So your story, every Manitoban story, matters here at the Manitoba Museum.
Well, I know that I chaired the Manitoba 150 celebrations, and when we looked at honoring 150 Manitobans, you were one, and trust me, you're not ordinary. You're quite extraordinary, Dorota. One of the other things is, you're very active on social media, and if anybody happens to go to Instagram and wants to put in at BLUMCZYNSKA, you're going to find every morning 4 pictures of a sunrise in Winnipeg or wherever you may be, but it's pretty much always in Winnipeg. Why do you do that? What's that about?
It's on Twitter. So just
on Twitter. Sorry, I said Instagram. I'm sorry. Yeah, so on
Instagram,
Twitter.
and I'm like, I haven't figured out Instagram.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so on Twitter at BLUMCZYNSKA on Twitter. Sorry, Dorota.
No. Just thought it's important. So what is that all about? Well, I started January 1st, 2021. And so now I think it's 660 some days in a row that I have greeted sunrise. I started greeting sunrise, not with the intent to keep going, but really with a couple weeks in mind, just to ground myself, to feel a sense of hope and optimism. We were really in the thick of the pandemic. I think I was searching for something to remind me that we're still a part of community. You know, we had gone through a lot of lockdowns and a lot of restrictions. I was still at IRCOM. It was very, very complicated for our newcomer families. There was a lot of isolation, and that isolation, I think, especially for communities coming from war zones or war impacted communities, that social isolation can have devastating mental health impacts. But we were also used to being a close family and being in close contact with one another. And so COVID began to tear apart the fabric that held us together. And so I very much was amongst the people who felt a sense of profound despair. And, where are we going? And is this ever going to end? And going to sunrise, it forced me in some ways to slow down. I couldn't get ahead on it. I couldn't do 3 days in one. I couldn't determine the time. It was something that was out of my control, and yet was a promise. It was going to happen. No matter what, it would come up the next day. And I needed that sense of certainty and the sense of optimism that came with that renewal and a new beginning. And after day 1, it's wonderful. And then day 2, it looks different. And then day 3, the colors, feel different. And day 4, the sky has a beautiful texture. And day 5, the wind blows in a certain way. And then you start to realize that no single day is the same. And so the curiosity, but also the hunger for what's to come begins to grow. And now it's just so completely a part of what I do each and every day that, I watch the horizon and I tell the kids, okay, we're getting ready for sunrise, or I'm running up to sunrise. And it's my medicine. It's my healing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, I'll repeat my apologies, but it's on Twitter at BLUMCZYNSKA. I'll put that also into the show notes. But Dorota Blumczynska, thank you so very much for being my guest today. I started out by saying that you're an educator, activist, advocate, storyteller, refugee. I think we've touched on most of those things during this conversation. And I just am delighted that you found some time to be a part of this podcast, Humans on Rights, because it's very meaningful. And I thank you for that.
Thank you, Stuart, for this amazing opportunity. Thank you for the conversation.
Thanks for listening to Humans on Rights. A transcript of this episode is available by clicking the link in the show notes of this episode. Humans on Rights is recorded and hosted by Stuart Murray. Social media marketing by Buffy Davey. Music by Doug Edmond. For more, go to humanrightshub.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.